All right, AP Human Geography classes, here's our last video on migration. And what we're going to focus on is why do people migrate within their own country? All right, or in other words, internal migration. And we're going to focus on intra-regional and inter-regional. Let's get to it. All right, why did people originally internally migrate within their own country? Well, no surprise here, to access and settle better farmland areas, right? This whole westward expansion, if you will. So what was the problem about reaching the interior in the beginning? Well, look, it was far from transportation areas, and it was hard to traverse because of this horrible terrain, all right, and also it was far from shipping areas, so to get goods from one place to the other. Obviously, technology has helped fix a lot of these issues. All right, let's keep going. All right, let's begin in colonial times here, around 1607. Well, no surprise, as I just went over, all settlement was near the Atlantic Ocean, right? That's where the majority of the people came from, 1607, from the Atlantic side. Now, we have an intervening obstacle for intra and inter-regional migration. As you can see here, the Appalachian Mountains span over that northeast border and hindered western progression, right? That whole hard-to-traverse terrain, all right? Well, that's one of our obstacles. And also, well, hostile indigenous people. And, well, they were hostile for a good reason, right? Okay, let's keep going. So let's focus on the early interior settlement when Americans first started moving westward. Well, the reason why it was easier to move westward was because of transportation improvements. And as you can see here, we have this horse and buggy transportation. And also, the government was offering large amounts of land at a very low price, which intrigued a lot of people to move out there. What also really helped was later on in the 1840s and 90s was the gold rush. And this greatly stimulated westward expansion to have people go all the way out there, all right, to obtain jobs and to basically, well, become rich. Then we jump up to the 1890s and 40s where we move to the Great Plains now. And here's why. We had an advancement in agriculture which helped cultivate the land, right? The Great Plains is this vast breadbasket, if you will, of land in the middle of the United States. Well, it's very hard to cultivate the land, but with technological advancements, we were able to. What also helped is that now the United States expanded the railroads, which also encouraged expansion because now they could bring their goods from a rural area to a city and market to be sold. Let's jump all the way to the recent times here, where the South has grown tremendously. And here's a couple reasons why. There are more job opportunities. There's quote-unquote better environmental conditions. Right? It's not really, really cold. Could it get really, really hot? I guess, but it's more of a temperate climate within the Sun Belt region. And as you can see right here, it's highlighted in that map. Now, within the United States, even today, inter-regional migration has slowed to almost 0% net between all regions. Just in a matter of 15 years, it has slowed down tremendously. All right, let's focus on some other countries besides the United States. Let's talk about Russia. Well, Russia wanted to expand the population concentration to the far north. Now, it's a resource-rich area, but the problem is they didn't have enough workers, and there's a ton of reasons why. Biggest reason why? Remoteness and the harsh climates all the way up there. So the government wanted to attract workers, and thus they hired all for wages and huge benefits to go up there and to work in that northern part of Russia. At least to say, it did work. Also, another example would be Brazil. Now, the interior of Brazil is sparsely inhabited, and that's because there's rainforest there. Well, Brazil decided to move their capital from Rio de Janeiro to Brasilia and build a new city to attract workers to the interior of Brazil. And when that happens, hopefully the suburban areas surrounding the city will become urbanized as well, and thus attracting more of its population to the center of Brazil. Another example is Indonesia. And Indonesia wanted to attract workers from the island of Java, one of the main islands here on the map to the right. And they basically wanted to put people to less populated areas. The purpose was to create more farmland, to generate more foodstuffs. And the government was, again, similar to Russia, willing to offer these men and women who wanted to move to their less populous islands generous supplies to build their own farm. All right, so we see here that governments are trying to expand in their own regions and trying to attract workers to those areas as well. All right, so just to get this down, far more people move intra-regional than inter-regional, right? So, for example, we live in the Northeast, so chances are you're likely to stay in the Northeast than go into any other regions such as the Southwest or the Southeast or the West or the Midwest or the North. All right. But the majority of movement is from cities to suburbs. In fact, 75% of the population of more developed countries live in urban areas. Now, people do move to the suburbs in increasing amounts, and that's really more for lifestyle reasons, not so much economic reasons, right? Most people move to a city to gain a job. People who leave the city, they do it for lifestyle reasons. Now, there has been a recent migration trend within NDCs such as the United States. It's something called counter-urbanization, and this is where people are going from urban areas back to rural areas, the total opposite of what's been going on the last 200 years. Now, again, the reason why it's not economic is actually for life lifestyle reasons. They just prefer that. And hey, there's nothing wrong with that. That's one of our push and pull factors, environmental. Okay, that's it. We're done with migration. Our test is coming up. We will talk about this more in class. I will see you then.